Stay with this account of Daniel through trials and triumphs. If it strengthens you, subscribe and like to hear more stories of faith. In the days when Jerusalem fell and its young men were led away, the city's stones still held the memory of altars and psalms, and the air tasted of smoke and unfinished prayers. From among the captives, a few were taken for service in the king's palace, chosen for their bearing and promise. Among them was Daniel, a youth whose name would come to mean more than personal fate. It would stand as a witness to a God who rules over crowns and calamities alike. They came to Babylon as the sun sifted over the walls, the Euphrates a wide ribbon of silver below the royal terrace. The palace rose in terraces and courts, columns wrapped in carved reliefs, the scent of cedar and incense mingling with the dust of marching feet. Ashpenaz, the chief of the eunuchs, received them with the measured politeness of an official who had seen many faces and many plans. He led them into chambers where robes and oil waited, into a routine of learning the tongue and the ways of the court. To the young men, these things were strange, foreign speech like a new weather, foreign food like a test of appetite and loyalty. Daniel and his three companions, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, were given new names by the palace scribes: Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. The names settled over them like a different garment, but beneath the surface their hearts remained tethered to the city of their youth and to the God of their fathers. They were instructed in the books of the Babylonians, trained for service, assessed for fitness to stand before a king. The affairs of empire swirled around them. Their lives might have been another kind of calling had they accepted all that the palace expected. A quiet decision arose between Daniel and the chief official, one that was small and yet would announce the character of a life. The royal table held meat offered to idols and rich wine from the king's stores. Daniel perceived that to partake unquestioningly would be to eat the symbols of submission. He asked Ashpenaz for permission to refuse the royal portion and to be given vegetables and water instead. The official feared the king's displeasure and the ruin of his office, but Daniel's calm and the quiet logic of his plea softened him. "Test us for 10 days," Daniel proposed, "and let our appearance be judged at the end." So they tasted the plain food. At the end of 10 days, their faces shone with a clarity that the rich fare had not produced. Their bodies were healthier than those who ate at the king's table. Thus God honored their faithfulness, and the court recognized that wisdom had a source beyond the city's libraries. God granted Daniel and his companions learning and insight. In time, Daniel found himself given to discern dreams and visions, a gift that set him apart, not by human merit, but by divine favor. When the great king Nebuchadnezzar was tormented by a dream that none of his wise men could explain, his anger burned as a furnace. He summoned all the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and sages. Their failure to reveal the dream's meaning turned the king's favor like a wheel toward judgment. In the uproar, Daniel came forward, not with presumption, but with prayer and a sober petition for mercy. He asked time to seek the God of heaven. That night, God revealed the mystery in a vision. Daniel then went before the king and recounted both the dream and its interpretation. The dream of a great image of many metals stood before the court: a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet partly of iron and partly of clay. Daniel spoke plainly. God had shown the succession of empires, and the head of gold was Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. Yet the end belonged neither to him nor to any other proud structure of men. A stone not cut by human hands would strike the image and become a mountain that filled the whole earth. The king, struck by the sight and by the interpretation that his rule fit within the purposes of the Almighty, fell on his face in honor, then raised Daniel to a high place. Nebuchadnezzar attributed to Daniel's God a sovereignty that could fathom the rise and fall of nations. Not all in the palace rejoiced. Favor breeds envy. As Daniel's star rose, so did the thoughts of those who measured themselves against him. They watched his ways for an excuse and reported what they wished the king to see. Yet time and again the young men's devotion stood like a lamp in a darkened hall. The trial of faith came again in more violent shape when the king set up a golden image and commanded every official, noble, and free man to bow when the trumpet sounded. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused. Their refusal was not political theater, but a matter of conscience. To bow would be to ascribe to a lifeless figure that worship due only to the living God. They stood their ground, and when the king discovered their defiance, his wrath was kindled. He ordered the furnace heated sevenfold and had them thrown in. The furnace roared like a sea of fire, and the soldiers who cast them in were themselves consumed by the flames. Yet those who watched were astonished. 4 walked unharmed in the midst of the blaze, and the 4th had the appearance of a heavenly being. Nebuchadnezzar, seized by a fear that was also awe, called them out. Not a hair of their heads was singed, their robes bore no scorch. The king spoke a proclamation that praised the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, recognizing that no God besides this could deliver in such a way. Pride, however, is a stubborn vine. Nebuchadnezzar, whose name was spoken like thunder across the plain, was not spared the lesson of humility. In another hour of revelation, he beheld himself like a tree planted by the waters, spreading shade and feeding many. Yet he also heard a voice that declared his place would be taken by beasts until he acknowledged that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of men and gives them to whomever he wills. Pride swelled in his breast, he boasted of his achievements, and the decree was set in motion. For a time the king's mind wandered. He was driven from human company. His heart made like a beast's, and his glory was stripped away. Only after he cried out to heaven and renounced his pride, the Lord restored him, and Nebuchadnezzar blessed and praised the God who had humbled him. Years turned as the great wheel of power rolled on. Belshazzar, who sat in the palace and feasted with the vessels taken from the temple at Jerusalem, held a night of revelry. He drank wine and praised the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, using the sacred vessels in mockery. At that hour, fingers appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall a judgment that none of the wise men could read. Panic seized the royal hall. Belshazzar's face changed like a shadow at dusk. The queen, old with memory, reminded them of Daniel, now aged in wisdom and known for understanding. Daniel was summoned. He spoke the words as Scripture had taught him, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. He explained that God had numbered the days of the king's reign and brought it to an end. He had been weighed and found wanting, and his kingdom would be divided and given to the Medes and Persians. That very night the city fell, and the prophecy stood as a mournful seal on the page of human pride. Through these upheavals, Daniel's life was not a lonely beacon, but a weave of counsel and prayer. He held office and influence under successive rulers, and with influence came the plotting of those who coveted his place. When the Medes and Persians established a new supremacy and Darius the Mede received authority, Daniel continued to serve with distinction. Yet his enemies conspired. They could find no fault in Daniel's administration, for he was trustworthy, but they plotted to trap him in his piety. They persuaded the king to issue a decree that no one should petition any god or man for 30 days except the king himself. Whosoever disobeyed would be cast into the den of lions. The law, once sealed with the king's ring, could not be repealed. It bore the force of the realm, and the conspirators felt secure. Daniel, when he learned of the decree, did not seek loopholes. His prayer habit was not a private hobby, but the axis of his life. From his upstairs chamber, he went to his window and opened it toward Jerusalem, as his custom was, and 3 times each day he knelt and gave thanks to his God. When the men reported his continued petitions, they presented the truth to Darius.
The king, distressed because he favored Daniel, tried until sunset to find a way to rescue him, but the law stood immutable, and Daniel was cast into the den of lions.
The night that followed was heavy, a darkness that seemed to press against the palace walls. The streets of the city lay quiet, except for the watch of sentries and the distant murmur of the river. Within the throne chamber, Darius spent a sleepless vigil. His loaf of peace was gone. His conscience gnawed at him like an unending whisper. At dawn, before the sun had fully risen, he hurried to the den and cried out with a voice broken by anxiety, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God been able to deliver you from the lions?" There came an answer that steadied the king's trembling heart. Daniel's voice, clear and whole. He told how God had sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. Daniel had been found innocent because he trusted the Lord. Darius, relieved and exultant, ordered Daniel lifted from the den. The conspirators, and those who had plotted, met the fate they had prepared for another. Justice, in the hands of a sovereign ruler, closed upon them. In the aftermath, Darius issued a decree across the realm. He honored the God of Daniel, commanding that all people tremble and fear before him, whose dominion is everlasting. Daniel's name, which had traveled with him from the ash of Jerusalem, had become a testament that the living God turns what is meant for ruin into a stage for his glory. Daniel remained at the court, his position secure, his life a balance of service and prophecy. In his later years, men spoke of his visions: beasts rising from the sea, a ram and a goat struggling in the heavens, the mysterious weeks that would mark a redemptive plan beyond the sight of immediate rulers. These visions did not merely predict, they assured those who heard that the God who reveals mysteries also governs history. Yet to tell of Daniel as if he were a man untouched by fear would be to flatten his witness. He felt the weight of exile in the night, the ache for a temple he could no longer approach, the sorrow for a people scattered. He feared for friends whose lives were endangered by his stand. There were moments when the burden of interpreting dreams and delivering unwelcome truths strained his heart. In solitary hours, he lifted prayers that were simple and direct. "O Lord, show me mercy, grant understanding, sustain those who are faithful." When the angel came with revelation, Daniel's gratitude overflowed into praise. In the hush after the king's proclamations, he would kneel and speak of the God who has mercy on the lowly and who hides his counsel with his faithful. The scenes of Daniel's life are sewn together by a few repeated threads: steadfast prayer, refusal to bow at the altar of convenience, wisdom granted by God, public vindication, and the gentle but inexorable hand of divine sovereignty. The palace courtiers who plotted against him reveal the persistent human failings that will always seek to silence truth when it speaks against advantage.
The kings who learn to praise God demonstrate that even a throne may be softened by a witness that cannot be bought. The miraculous deliverances are not mere displays, but signs that God keeps his promises and governs a world larger than any single ruler. Imagine, if you will, the smallness of a single lamp in a vast hall. It draws the eye not because of its size, but because it refuses to be extinguished. That lamp was often Daniel's life in Babylon. Simple acts of integrity, a chosen diet, a refusal to bow, a prayer at an open window, that together cast light into a realm of shifting loyalties and harsh decrees. Those acts did not avert suffering. Rather, they shaped how suffering was met. In the furnace, the three walked unburned. In the den, a man walked unharmed. Yet in other trials, faith did not always spare pain. It steadied the soul. There is a lesson tucked within these events for those who labor in secular courts and kingdoms of their own age. Integrity before God need not be grand to be decisive. Consistent prayer, the courage to speak truth, and a willingness to accept the cost of faithfulness are as significant now as they were in Babylon. When a life is governed by the knowledge that God rules over nations and not merely over temples, earthly honors are seen for what they are:
entrusted responsibilities, not final claims. In the closing of Daniel's long service, men observed both his political skill and his prophetic sight. He lived to be a bridge between past grief and future hope, a living archive of God's dealings with a people who had been scattered. His visions, beasts, horns broken and raised, spoke to the communities that would follow him, offering both warning and comfort. That empires rise and fall, but the God who reveals the end is Israel's God, whose plan outlasts the brief thunder of kings. And so the story returns to its theme, God's sovereignty over rulers and the vindication of those who remain faithful in exile. Daniel's life testifies that power is tested by humility, wisdom by prayer, and prophecy by the fidelity of a life lived before God. The stone that strikes the image does not mock the labor of men. It reorders every labor to serve a purpose beyond itself. The tree that once shaded and then fell reveals the danger of a heart unbent before the Lord. The lions and the furnace show that danger serves as a stage for God's deliverance when men refuse to disown their God. If the reader carries away one conviction from this account, let it be this: steadfastness in small things makes one ready for the great disclosures of God. The habit of prayer, the choice of daily obedience, the refusal to bow to expediency, all these shape a life that can stand unmoved when the world's praise or its fury arrives. A short reflection. In places of work and in halls that glitter with fleeting honors, living as Daniel lived means choosing the way that pleases God rather than the path that prospers one's name.
It means speaking truth with humility, accepting the consequences, and trusting that God's scrutiny is final. In times of trial, remember the image of a man in the den whose voice came forth undiminished. Remember the three in the furnace who walked with one whose form was like a messenger of heaven. These are not mere stories of escape. They are invitations to see suffering as an altar upon which faith is offered and sometimes answered. May such a witness encourage you when pressures mount. If this account of Daniel has strengthened your heart, consider subscribing and sharing it so others might be encouraged. Leave a comment about which moment moved you most. Your reflection helps others remember that fidelity still finds its reward. Beyond the witness of court and covenant, Daniel's later visions push the narrative from the particular to the cosmic. In visions given at night, he saw 4 great beasts rising from the sea, each terrible and unlike the last. He saw horns broken and horns that sprang up in arrogance. He saw a little horn that spoke proudly and cast truth to the ground. He saw the Ancient of Days take his seat, the books opened, and the judgment that unmasked pretension. And he beheld one like a son of man brought before the Ancient One and given dominion and glory for all peoples and times. These images do not belong to palace intrigue alone. They belong to the moral geometry of history. They tell a people that nations are mortal, that violence and boasting are transient, and that true authority is bestowed, not seized. There is a firmness in these visions that answers an exile's deepest question: who ultimately holds the account of empires and of men? Daniel's answer, with prophetic clarity, is that God alone ordains and adjudicates. The beasts may trample, and the horns may boast, yet at the appointed hour God will judge and will establish a realm whose tenure is not measured by human calendars. For those who listen in exile, whose tomorrow is a ledger of losses and compromises, such a revelation is more than consolation. It is a reorientation of courage. The faithful are not called to master the world's tumult, but to live as citizens of the coming rule, to bear witness to a reality that will outlast every throne. The visions of the ram and the he-goat enlarge that truth with sober particularity. Kingdoms will contend, swift and surprising powers will rise, and the dream of many will be that the strong-hearted prevail.
Yet even in the midst of these forecasts, and here is the compassion of prophecy, God speaks to prepare his people, to warn, to steady. Daniel is not shown a closed tableau of inevitabilities to provoke despair. He is shown patterns so that souls may labor rightly in the midst of what comes. Prophecy, in this account, performs pastoral work. It reframes fear into watchfulness. It converts curiosity about power into fidelity of conduct. There is also a human cost recorded in these chapters.
Daniel himself knows weariness. He prays until his countenance is changed. He is left because the time of the end is distant and the way hard. He receives interpretation from angelic messengers who warn of hardships yet to come, a time of anguish unequaled, yet also a time when many shall be saved. The prophet's burden is to bear both sorrow and hope, to name the coming trial, and to point to the hidden mercy that will not be exhausted. Here, too, his life instructs the exiled and oppressed. Prophecy does not flinch from darkness, but it never leaves darkness unaccompanied by the promise of dawn. Daniel's end, as the book leaves it, is quiet and resolute. There is no grand coronation for the seer. There is the simple assurance given to one who has kept faith. You shall rest and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of days. The final note is not triumphal fanfare, but a settled trust. The revelations are sealed until the time appointed. Some truths are given to console the patient, not to satisfy curiosity. The prophet's reward is not power, but peace, an ordered rest that promises a future rise. Such an ending befits a man whose life was shaped by the steady rhythm of prayer, whose greatest acts were fidelity when no eye but God seemed to see. For the reader in any age, the lessons cluster around the same pivot. Live with eyes lifted beyond transient honor. Keep the small disciplines that form character. Accept that suffering sometimes refines rather than removes. And trust that God's governance is both just and eventual. Daniel's example rescues piety from a private pietism and places it squarely in the public arena. Worship that is seen only by God nevertheless informs how one behaves before rulers, how one speaks when lies are profitable, and how one prays when silence would be easier. If there is an encouragement to carry home from these pages, it is this: prophecy and politics need not be enemies. A life that fears God will speak into power with humility and will bear exile with hope. The visions that spoke of beasts and horns end in the image of one given everlasting dominion. And that conclusion summons a daily posture, one of vigilance, prayer, and moral constancy. When honors fall away, or when men seek to buy silence, let a single lamp remain burning in the hall of your heart. So the book closes not with a final unveiling, but with a charge. Keep faith in small things. Be ready for the hour of revelation, and rest in the promise that God's judgment will come true. Daniel's life thus sits between two great truths: that history has its woes, and that God's fidelity outlives every sorrow. May those truths steady the reader's hand when decisions weigh heavy. And may the prophet's quiet courage teach that the most enduring victories often begin with a daily refusal to compromise. The lamp still burns. The visions still speak. The exile's hope endures. The lamp still burns. The visions still speak. The exile's hope endures.
Beyond these final sentences, there remains a quieter work to be done. To take the threads of Daniel's life and weave them into the everyday cloth of a people living between castles of power and the hidden courts of God. For prophecy, as Daniel shows, is not only speech about distant events. It is a pastoral art that forms character. From it we draw not merely predictions, but patterns for living. How to pray when prayer seems to change nothing. How to stand before rulers when the cost of truth is high. How to keep one's heart unpurchased in a world that trades in favors and fear. First, consider the discipline of prayer. Daniel's prayers do not appear as feats of eloquence meant to impress the palace. They are faithful returns to a covenantal habit. He prays his set hours, he opens the window toward the old land, and even when laws are pressed upon him, he persists. There is a steadiness here that matters more than the answer's timing. Prayer trains the soul to recognize its dependence. It reorders desires that might otherwise be shaped by the palace or by the crowd. To imitate Daniel is not to seek a formula for immediate success, but to cultivate a readiness. To be a person whose first movement is toward God when trouble comes, whose reflex is confession, petition, and praise rather than resentment or cunning. Closely allied to prayer is the matter of witness. In the courts of Babylon and in the councils of exile, Daniel's life is testimony. He refuses defilement in small matters, meals and dress, and by these small refusals he preserves a larger integrity. The narrative presses this point without sermonizing. Fidelity shows itself in the ordinary choices that are easily overlooked. A polity may attempt to assimilate the stranger by co-optation or by gentleness. The faithful resist not out of stubborn separatism, but out of fidelity to a prior allegiance. Their resistance is not a social posture alone, but an ethical reclamation. To say that loyalty to God governs duties to fathers, to neighbor, to ruler. Such witness often works quietly, through reputation, through proven reliability, through the calm of one who answers wisely, and it exerts a moral gravity that can shift a room more than any public declamation. There is, too, a lesson about discernment and the limits of knowledge. Daniel receives visions and is given interpretation by messengers. Yet he is repeatedly told that some things are for the time of the end, and that the revelation is sealed. That sealedness is not a failure, but a mercy. It restrains us from the idolatry of speculation. The knowledge that we have is enough to command faith and obedience. The knowledge we lack is meant to keep us humble. Prophecy's pastoral goal is not to make every ear a prognosticator, but to fashion hearts that endure ambiguity. When the angel says, "Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed until the time of the end," the prophet is given a vocation. He is to live in the meantime. Thus the book counsels patience. Live rightly now, even when the pattern of history remains partially veiled. Daniel's dealings with sovereigns teach a restrained politics. He interprets dreams not to curry favor, but to serve the needs of persons who come to him in perplexity. He refuses honors that would compromise worship. He accepts positions only insofar as they permit the maintenance of conscience. Political engagement, then, is permissible and sometimes necessary. It is never an end in itself. The faithful are to speak truth to power, to advise with humility, and to refuse to have their lips bought. When the proud fall, it will not be because of partisan plots alone, but because the moral order that God sustains has been violated. The prophet's role is corrective and prophetic, to reveal when the deeds of rulers stray from justice, and to counsel the remnant in how to live faithfully amid those errors. Suffering, as the text insists, has a refining shape. The book's visions point often to tribulation, times of distress such as never were. Yet they also display a divine architecture in which suffering is held within God's purposes. For the exiled, this means that sorrow is not arbitrary cruelty, but an arena in which steadfastness is forged. Daniel himself bears the fatigue of translation, of longing, of being a stranger in a strange land. He grows weary, he prays, and yet he endures. There is no promise that God will remove every hardship in the present age, but there is a promise that the present age's sharpness will not be the final word. God's fidelity outlives the immediate trial. The endurance of the faithful is itself a witness to that fidelity. Another pastoral theme concerns community. Daniel may stand out as a singular figure, but the book never endorses solitary piety as the only path. Exile is communal. The remnant is a gathered reality. Daniel's acts have consequences for others. His interpretations comfort or warn. His restraint in food and worship models a way for many. The faithful are therefore called to cultivate institutions of solidarity, the shared memory of the covenant, the regular practice of prayer, the mutual correction that prevents individual zeal from becoming destructive. A people formed by these practices can resist assimilation without becoming insular. They maintain an open fidelity, devoted to God, hospitable to neighbors, and critical of powers when justice is at stake. A related point is the ethics of language. In the book, one sees the careful use of words, to name a thing rightly, to speak truth without malice, to reveal what must be said, and to withhold what would feed panic. Daniel's interpretations are measured. He does not indulge in sensationalism. His visions, full of beasts and horns and numbers, are communicated in a way that calls for sober reflection. Prophetic speech, then, must be responsible.
The danger in any age is that signs multiply into spectacles and that the appetite for novelty displaces the call to repentance. The prophet must tether imagination to moral and spiritual ends. Visions are not entertainment, but instruments to awaken the conscience. There is also a thought here about hope and its form. The hope of Daniel is not utopian complacency. It is a steadfast conviction that God will establish a rule that fully vindicates justice. This hope shapes present action by providing a telos. One behaves as a citizen of that future rule, not merely as a subject of present authorities. Hope makes one courageous in small choices because it redescribes honor and shame. What men now applaud may be shallow. What God will vindicate may be hidden. The remnant's courage is therefore calibrated by eschatological vision. It keeps watch, preserves light, and speaks truth without expecting immediate triumph. The book's final chord, assurance of rest and standing at an appointed time, gives comfort to those who have labored without visible return. In many lives, the promise of a future standing is the only thing that preserves fidelity. When the work seems lost, when sacrifices feel wasted and friendships broken, the word that one will stand in his allotted place at the end of days offers a dignity that no temporal reward can match. It dignifies patient endurance, elevating ordinary faithfulness into the rank of sacred work. That promise should reshape how we measure success, not by the ledger of honor today, but by the fidelity that will have an eternal accounting. Finally, there is an ethical summons embedded in every page. Keep the lamp burning. The image is not an abstract piety, but a call to particular practices. Read scripture, keep regular prayer, form friendships that sharpen rather than flatter. Speak truth with courage and mercy. Refuse the bribe of quiet acquiescence when justice is at stake. Live plainly in such a way that your life can be read as a counter-narrative to the claims of the world. This is the vocation of an exilic people, to embody a present counter-kingdom that anticipates the coming reign. If there be a danger, it is twofold. One danger is the temptation to withdraw from the public square, mistaking separation for holiness. The other is to imitate the world's methods to gain advantage, thereby losing the distinctiveness that is the witness. Daniel's life negotiates between those dangers by a simple rule: do not surrender the heart. Whether at the palace gate or in the quiet of a room that looks toward Jerusalem, the essential thing is to keep allegiance pure. That purity does not make one irrelevant, it makes one prophetic. So let the reader take heart. The visions that troubled Daniel remain strange to the eye, but their moral thrust is clear. The end-time language, the beasts and wars, the seals and angels, all these serve to locate a people in time, to remind them that history moves toward a justice not yet fully realized, and that those who keep faith will find their labor transmuted into eternal meaning. The prophet's seal is not a guarantee that puzzles will be solved now. It is an invitation to live under God's economy, where endurance, prayer, and moral clarity matter deeply. Return then to familiar practices. Let the discipline of prayer be the first line of defense against fear. Let the refusal to be bought govern words and choices. Let neighbor love be the test of theology.
If one's words about God do not issue in acts of mercy, they are suspect. Be patient with the limits of knowledge. Do not allow the hunger for signs to displace obedience. Keep watch not as those who expect sensational revelation, but as those who steward what has been entrusted. The story of Daniel closes with a lamp burning in an exile's house. That lamp is not merely memory. It is a living duty. To tend it is to keep a witness alive in the world, a witness that power is transient, that truth endures, and that God's governance will yet be seen. Live so that when the appointed hour comes, the one who has kept the lamp will also stand in his allotted place, calm, collected, and counted among those who bore witness well. The lamp still burns. Watch the light. Keep your hands steady. The city around you changes. The thrones tumble and arise. The noises of history roll on. But in the quiet chamber where one bends the knee, a covenant is kept that outlasts kingdoms. Hold to it. Hold fast. Do not mistake patience for passivity. The lamp must be tended by deliberate acts, not by wishful thinking. That tending takes shape in ordinary disciplines. The reading of Scripture that reorients desire, the steady practice of prayer that trains the heart to confess and to wait, the regular gathering of those who will hold one another accountable rather than flatter. These are not private virtues meant only for insulation. They are habits forged for witness. A people who pray together and read together will also give together, feed strangers, plead for justice, and refuse the easy idols of comfort and prestige. Teach the young to keep the lamp. Children learn by watching where the light is kept, at table, at bedside, in the words spoken when sorrow comes. Train them in the language of covenant, in the names and stories that shape a counter-memory of God's faithfulness. Let them hear of faithfulness shown in small mercies as readily as in dramatic deliverances. When the next generation can tell of ordinary fidelity, of neighbors sheltered, of bread shared, of truth spoken in low tones, they will be less likely to be seduced by the glamours of present advantage. Preserve friendships that sharpen. The community that sustains a lamp is not a congregation of yes-men.
It includes those who will ask hard questions, who will confess failure, who will rebuke in love. Mutual confession and mutual exhortation are the economizing practices of an exilic people. They keep allegiance from dissolving into mere sentiment. Seek companions whose loyalties are visibly ordered by God and neighbor rather than by self-interest or public acclaim. Let the refusal to be bought govern speech. Daniel's testimony in the palace was never a mere apology for survival. It was a refusal to allow gratitude to be bought by compromise. So the modern reader must learn to count the cost of words. When flattery wins favor and truth costs reputation, choose speech that honors the covenant. Speak plainly about injustice. Do not cloak wrong under the pretense of peace. Let mercy govern tone and patience govern timing, but let truth govern content. The lamp is endangered as much by silence as by scandal. Practice a patience that is active, not escapist. There will be seasons when the faithful seem to accomplish nothing. History keeps its own account in ways unseen. Yet obedience in those seasons is not meaningless. It is the seedbed of future vindication. Continue the practices of prayer and mercy even where visible fruit is absent. Such persistence is a kind of resurrection pledge. It trusts that God is making what appears lost into something enduring. Beware the twin temptations already named. Separatism, the retreat into a purity that becomes a withdrawal, abandons the world at the precise point where testimony is most required. Conversely, accommodation, the adoption of worldly means and ends, erodes the distinctiveness that gives testimony its force. Daniel shows a third way, engagement without capitulation. He served in the court, yet refused the court's gods. He translated the language of empire without allowing his loyalties to be translated. That way requires wisdom.
The discernment to distinguish means from ends, the courage to say no when the means would make one complicit, and the humility to accept limits when one's influence cannot change what is passing. Let worship form imagination. The forms of worship, song, word, sacrament, are not accessories to life, but instruments that shape vision. They teach us how to measure honor and shame, to rehearse the coming reign, to rehearse allegiance until it becomes habitual. A community that neglects worship will find its choices governed by expedience rather than by covenant. Conversely, a community that worships learns again what it means to live for something beyond the ledger of applause. Do not despair over mystery. Daniel's visions are strange and sometimes disorienting precisely because they refuse easy domestication. We will not map every detail. Many signs are given to wake us, not to satisfy curiosity. Hold lightly the desire for chronological neatness and press firmly the moral demands those visions make upon the present.
The prophetic imagination is less a code to be cracked than a summons to live under God's governance now. Finally, keep the lamp for one another. Vigilance is contagious. It is renewed in community. When one stumbles, let another lift. When one is tempted to sell out, let a friend remind him of the covenant. When despair presses hard, let the gathered prayers of the remnant call forth courage. In that shared tending, the lamp becomes more than a private consolation. It becomes a communal sign that God's rule still has witnesses in the world. So live with steady hands. Arrange your days around practices that sustain. Choose friends who will not let you drift. Refuse the bribes that would quiet your conscience. Love your neighbor in ways that prove your theology. In such small fidelities, the great promise is kept, that those who have kept the lamp will one day stand in their allotted place. The light you tend now may be thin, and the room may be full of shadows, but even a thin light is enough to show the path. Keep watch, keep steady, keep faith. Let that thin light govern your days, patient, courageous, communal, until the dawn of vindication. Hold to it. Let these truths settle into the marrow of daily life. Whether you are placed at a table of power or in a quiet house of prayer, arrange your heart so that every small choice rehearses the coming reign. Do not trade steadiness for applause, nor gentleness for the ease of being liked. In the ordinary fidelity of morning and evening, in the keeping of vows to neighbor and God, the lamp is tended. Hold fast to one another. Where courage thins, lend yours. Where faith falters, bear the burden of prayer. Remember that vindication is God's work, not ours, and that perseverance is itself praise. Live as those whose light is given, not as those who manufacture light by flattering men. And when morning comes, whether soon or in some day unseen, the faithfulness that looked small will be shown to have been great. Till then, keep the lamp, keep the covenant, and keep your hope sure in the God who remembers every witness.